There's something terrifying about being seen, isn't there? About stepping into the world with your dreams, your fears, and your truths laid bare for others to scrutinize. But here's the thing. Being seen is also what makes you alive. It's where courage is born, where connection is forged, and where you reclaim your power. Judgment will come, it always does. Some will misunderstand you, some will dismiss you, and others might try to silence you. But their words don't define you. Their opinions don't shape the worth of what you're building or the authenticity of who you are. What they think is their burden to carry, not yours. You can waste your life trying to mold yourself into something palatable for everyone. But let me tell you this, you will never be enough for the people who refuse to see your worth. And you will always be too much for those who are afraid of your light. Stop living to avoid judgment and start living for what sets your soul on fire. Vulnerability is strength, even when others misunderstand it. This statement carries within it a truth that often feels counterintuitive. Vulnerability at its core is the willingness to show up as your authentic self, to expose your deepest fears, hopes, and dreams, and to take risks despite the uncertainty of the outcome. And yet, in a world that frequently values invincibility over honesty, it is also one of the most misunderstood and undervalued attributes a person can embody. To be vulnerable is to step into an arena without the guarantee of applause or approval. It means standing before the world, arms wide open, with all your imperfections, flaws, and humanity in full view. Many see this as weakness. They equate vulnerability with fragility or incompetence, as if admitting you don't have all the answers somehow diminishes your worth. But nothing could be further from the truth. Vulnerability is not the absence of strength. It is the purest expression of it. Strength is not defined by how well you can shield yourself from pain, but by how willing you are to face it head-on and keep moving forward. Andrea Simpson Reynolds, Flossy Boots, and the Woman Fry. Think about the moments in your life when you felt most alive, most connected, or most courageous. They likely weren't the moments when everything was perfectly in place and you felt in complete control. They were probably the moments when you risked something. Your heart, your reputation, or your sense of certainty. Maybe it was the time you told someone you loved them without knowing if they would feel the same, or the time you pursued a dream despite the doubts of others. Or perhaps it was a moment of deep honesty where you admitted to a mistake, revealed a struggle, or asked for help. These moments are the essence of vulnerability. And they are also the moments that shape who we are. But here's the paradox. While vulnerability is an act of courage, it is also profoundly uncomfortable. To be vulnerable is to face the possibility of rejection, ridicule, or failure. It is to stand in the raw truth of your humanity and invite others to see you as you are, without the masks or defenses we so often use to protect ourselves. And because of this discomfort, many people avoid vulnerability altogether. They build walls around their hearts, avoid difficult conversations, and strive to project an image of perfection. They mistake these defenses for strength, not realizing that the very act of hiding is what keeps them small. Strength is not about being invulnerable. It is about embracing your vulnerability and showing up anyway. It is about saying, this is who I am, and I'm not afraid to be seen. It is about recognizing that the risks of being vulnerable are far outweighed by the rewards. Because when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you also allow yourself to be truly seen and known. And in that space of authenticity, you create the possibility for real connection, growth, and transformation. Consider the way vulnerability transforms relationships. When you are willing to share your true thoughts and feelings, even when it's uncomfortable, You create a space for intimacy and trust. Vulnerability is the foundation of all meaningful relationships because it is the gateway to connection. Without it, relationships remain surface level, built on facades rather than truths. But when you dare to open up, to admit your fears, to share your dreams, to acknowledge your mistakes, you invite others to do the same. You create a bond that is rooted in authenticity rather than pretense. Of course, this doesn't mean that vulnerability is easy, far from it. In a culture that often celebrates stoicism and self-reliance, vulnerability can feel like a radical act. It requires you to challenge societal norms and redefine what it means to be strong. It asks you to stand in the face of judgment and criticism and say, "I am enough just as I am." And it demands that you cultivate a deep sense of self-worth so that your value isn't tied to how others perceive you. One of the most common misconceptions about vulnerability is that it makes you weak or powerless. But the truth is that vulnerability is the birthplace of resilience. When you are willing to face your fears and embrace your imperfections, you build the inner strength to navigate life's challenges with grace and courage. Vulnerability teaches you that you can survive failure, rejection, and heartbreak, and that these experiences, while painful, do not define you. Instead, they become opportunities for growth and learning, helping you to become more compassionate, more empathetic, and more human. Another important aspect of vulnerability is its role in creativity and innovation. Every great artist, inventor, or entrepreneur has had to embrace vulnerability at some point in their journey. To create something new is to take a risk, to put a piece of yourself into the world without knowing how it will be received. It is to face the possibility of failure, criticism, or misunderstanding, and to keep creating anyway. Vulnerability is what allows us to dream big, take risks, and push boundaries. It is what fuels our capacity for innovation and allows us to imagine new possibilities for ourselves and the world. Vulnerability is what allows us to dream big, take risk, and allows us to imagine new possibilities for ourselves and the world. And yet, despite its power, vulnerability is often met with resistance. Many people fear vulnerability because they equate it with weakness or exposure. They worry that if they show their true selves, they will be judged, rejected, or ridiculed. And while these fears are valid, they are also limiting. The truth is that vulnerability is not about being perfect or having all the answers. It is about being real. It is about showing up with your whole self, even when it's messy or imperfect, and trusting that you are enough. One of the greatest acts of courage you can undertake is to embrace vulnerability in a world that often misunderstands it. This means being willing to take risks, even when you're afraid. It means having the courage to have hard conversations, even when they're uncomfortable. It means allowing yourself to be seen, even when it feels safer to hide. And it means recognizing that your worth is not determined by how others perceive you, but by your willingness to show up and live authentically. Vulnerability is not something you master, it is something you practice. It is a daily choice to lean into discomfort, to embrace uncertainty, and to show up as your true self. It requires you to cultivate self-compassion and to let go of the need for perfection. And it asks you to trust that no matter what happens, you are capable of handling it, because the truth is you are stronger than you realize. Because the truth is, you are stronger than you realize. And your willingness to be vulnerable is a testament to that strength. So the next time you find yourself hesitating to speak your truth or take a risk, remember this: vulnerability is not weakness, it is strength. It is the courage to be yourself, even when it's hard. It is the willingness to show up even when the outcome is uncertain. And it is the choice to live a life that is authentic, meaningful, and true. Let others misunderstand vulnerability if they must. Their judgment does not diminish its power. For those who truly understand, vulnerability is not a sign of weakness, but a mark of extraordinary strength. Judgment says more about the judged than the judged. This simple yet profound truth often goes unexamined, yet it holds the key to freeing ourselves from the weight of others' opinions. Judgment is a mirror, reflecting not the worth or shortcomings of the person being judged, but the fears, biases, and insecurities of the one doing the judging. To truly understand the dynamics of judgment is to liberate ourselves from its grasp, allowing us to live authentically and without apology. When someone judges you, it's easy to internalize their words, to wonder what you did wrong or why you are not enough in their eyes. This is a natural reaction. As humans, we are hardwired for connection and often seek validation from those around us. However, judgment is rarely about you. It's about the lens through which the other person sees the world, a lens shaped by their experiences, beliefs, and unresolved wounds. Their judgment is a projection, a way of externalizing their own internal struggles. Understanding this can shift your perspective, allowing you to approach judgment not as an indictment of your character, but as a reflection of the judge's inner world. Consider for a moment the ways in which you have judged others. Perhaps you've criticized someone for being too loud or too quiet, too ambitious or not ambitious enough, too unconventional or too traditional. If you look closely, you may find that these judgments often stem from your own insecurities or values. For example, if you judge someone for taking risks, it might be because you fear stepping out of your comfort zone. If you criticize someone for their appearance, it might be because you've internalized societal standards that you've struggled to meet. Judgment, in this sense, is a form of self-protection. By pointing the finger outward, we deflect attention from our own vulnerabilities and avoid confronting the aspects of ourselves that we find uncomfortable. This is not to say that all judgment is malicious or even conscious. Often it operates at a subconscious level, influenced by societal norms, cultural expectations, and personal experiences. We are all products of our environments, and our judgments are shaped by the narratives we have absorbed over time. This is why it's so important to examine our own judgments with curiosity and compassion. When we recognize that our judgments are not objective truths but subjective interpretations, we can begin to question them. We can ask ourselves, what does this judgment say about me? What fear or belief is driving it? And how can I approach this situation with more understanding and empathy? Empathy is the antidote to judgment. When we take the time to understand someone else's perspective, to see the world through their eyes, we realize that judgment is often a simplistic and incomplete narrative. People are complex, shaped by a multitude of factors that we may never fully understand. What may appear to us as a flaw or failing might be to them a source of pride or resilience. For example, someone who is perceived as stubborn might actually be tenacious, holding on to their values in the face of adversity. Someone who seems overly cautious might have experienced trauma that makes them wary of taking risks. When we approach others with empathy, we replace judgment with curiosity, allowing us to see the richness and complexity of their humanity. But what about when we are the ones being judged? How do we navigate the sting of criticism or disapproval? The first step is to recognize that judgment is inevitable. No matter how hard you try to please others or conform to their expectations, there will always be someone who disapproves. This is not a reflection of your inadequacy, but of the impossibility of satisfying everyone's expectations. People will judge you based on their own values, preferences, and insecurities, and their judgments often have little to do with who you truly are. So a question has come up. How do you interpret? This is why it's so important to cultivate a strong sense of self-worth. When you know your own value, You become less reliant on external validation and more resilient in the face of judgment. You realize that your worth is not determined by others' opinions, but by your own integrity and authenticity. This doesn't mean that criticism won't hurt. It's natural to feel the sting of disapproval. But when you have a solid foundation of self-worth, you can distinguish between constructive feedback that helps you grow and baseless judgment that has no bearing on your value. Another crucial aspect of navigating judgment is setting boundaries. Not all judgments deserve your attention or energy. Some people criticize not to help or support, but to undermine or control. These judgments often stem from their own fears or insecurities, and engaging with them only gives them power. Learning to discern which judgments are worth considering and which are not is an act of self-preservation. It allows you to focus on what truly matters: your own growth, values, and well-being, rather than being derailed by the opinions of others. Through tough times, strength and grace become evident. At the same time, it's important to remain open to feedback, especially when it comes from a place of care and concern. Not all criticism is judgmental. Some of it is constructive and can help you grow. The key is to approach feedback with an open mind and a discerning heart. Ask yourself, is this feedback coming from someone who knows and cares about me? Does it align with my values and goals? And is there something I can learn from it? When you approach feedback with curiosity rather than defensiveness, you create an opportunity for growth and self-improvement. It's also worth noting that judgment can be a source of connection and understanding when approached with compassion. When someone judges you, it's often because they see something in you that challenges their worldview or triggers their insecurities. By responding with kindness and curiosity, you can create a space for dialogue and mutual understanding. For example, if someone criticizes your career choices, you might say, "I understand that my path might look different from what you're used to. Can you tell me more about why you feel that way?" This approach doesn't guarantee that the other person will change their perspective, but it opens the door to a more meaningful and empathetic conversation. Ultimately, freeing yourself from the weight of judgment requires a shift in mindset. It means recognizing that judgment is not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of the judge's perspective. It means approaching judgment with curiosity and empathy, both toward yourself and others. And it means cultivating a strong sense of self-worth so that your value is not determined by external opinions, but by your own integrity and authenticity. When you free yourself from the need to please others or conform to their expectations, you create space for true authenticity. You allow yourself to live in alignment with your values, to pursue your dreams without fear of disapproval, and to show up as your whole, imperfect self. This is not an easy path, but it is a liberating one. It requires courage, self-compassion, and a willingness to embrace your humanity, flaws and all. So the next time you find yourself weighed down by someone else's judgment, take a moment to pause and reflect. Ask yourself, what does this judgment say about them? What does it say about me? And how can I use this experience to grow and deepen my understanding of myself and others? By approaching judgment with curiosity and compassion, you transform it from a source of pain into a source of insight and growth. And remember, judgment says more about the judge than the judged. This truth is your shield against the arrows of criticism and disapproval. It is a reminder that your worth is not determined by others' opinions, but by your own authenticity and integrity. It is an invitation to live boldly, unapologetically, and with the knowledge that you are enough, just as you are. Owning your story takes courage, no matter who's watching. It requires an unflinching willingness to confront the truth of who you are, where you've been, and where you're going. It means standing in the entirety of your experiences, claiming both the triumphs and the struggles as your own. To own your story is to take responsibility for your narrative, not in the sense of control or perfection, but in the sense of authenticity and acceptance. It is one of the most profound acts of bravery a person can undertake, and yet it is also one of the most challenging. Making small changes to our living environments. Why is owning your story so difficult? Because it demands that you face your vulnerabilities head on. It requires you to acknowledge the parts of yourself that you'd rather keep hidden, the mistakes, the failures, the wounds that have yet to heal. It asks you to relinquish the masks you've worn to protect yourself and to embrace the messiness of being human. And it demands that you do all of this in a world that often rewards conformity and punishes authenticity. To own your story is to step into the spotlight, knowing full well that some will cheer, some will jeer, and others will remain indifferent. It is to say, this is who I am, even when you're not sure how your truth will be received. It's time to let the light in. It's time to live the truth. That is what makes life bright. One of the greatest barriers to owning your story is the fear of judgment. We live in a culture that often equates vulnerability with weakness and imperfection with failure. This makes it tempting to edit our stories, to present only the parts that are polished and palatable while hiding the rest. But this kind of selective storytelling is not ownership. It is performance. True ownership requires you to embrace your story in its entirety, including the parts that make you uncomfortable. It means saying, yes, I made that mistake. Yes, I've struggled with that challenge. And yes, those experiences have shaped me into the person I am today. When you own your story, you reclaim your power. Instead of allowing others to define you based on their perceptions or judgments, you define yourself. You take control of your narrative, choosing how you interpret and share your experiences. This doesn't mean rewriting history or ignoring the pain of the past. It means reframing your story in a way that empowers you rather than diminishes you. It means recognizing that your worth is not determined by the chapters of your story, but by the courage it takes to tell it. Owning your story also means embracing the idea that your story is still unfolding. It is not a fixed script, but an evolving narrative, shaped by every choice you make and every experience you encounter. This is both liberating and daunting. On one hand, it means you have the power to change your story, to write new chapters, and to redefine what your life means. On the other hand, it means letting go of the illusion of control and accepting the uncertainty of the future. Owning your story requires you to find a balance between agency and surrender, between taking responsibility for your life and acknowledging the factors that are beyond your control. Another challenge of owning your story is the temptation to compare your narrative to others. In a world where social media often presents an idealized version of reality, it's easy to feel like your story isn't enough. You might compare your struggles to someone else's successes or your journey to someone else's destination. But comparison is the thief of authenticity. Your story is uniquely yours, and its value does not depend on how it measures up to someone else's. When you own your story, you let go of the need to compete or conform. You recognize that your worth is not determined by external validation, but by your willingness to live authentically. Here's the promise. Owning your story is not just an act of self-empowerment. It is also an act of service. When you share your story with honesty and vulnerability, you create a space for others to do the same. You give them permission to embrace their own humanity and to find strength in their struggles. Your story becomes a bridge, connecting you to others and reminding them that they are not alone. This is why owning your story matters. It's not just about you, it's about the impact your authenticity has on the world around you. But make no mistake, owning your story is not about seeking attention or validation. It is not about broadcasting your experiences to the world for the sake of approval. It is about living in alignment with your truth, whether or not anyone else is watching. It is about being honest with yourself and with those who matter most to you. It is about refusing to let shame or fear dictate your choices, and instead choosing to live with integrity and courage. End of poem. There will be times when owning your story feels like an uphill battle. You may face criticism, rejection, or misunderstanding. You may struggle with self-doubt or the lingering effects of past wounds. But it is in these moments that owning your story becomes even more important. When you stand firm in your truth, despite the challenges, you prove to yourself that you are stronger than you think. You show yourself that your worth is not dependent on external circumstances, but on your internal resolve. Wow. Bob says, owning your story also requires a deep sense of self-compassion. It means forgiving yourself for the mistakes you've made and the times you've fallen short. It means acknowledging that you are a work in progress and that growth is a lifelong journey. Self-compassion allows you to embrace your imperfections without letting them define you. It gives you the grace to move forward, even when the path is difficult, and to celebrate your progress, no matter how small. To own your story is to embrace the complexity of your humanity. It is to recognize that you are not just one thing, not just your successes, your failures, or your roles. You are a mosaic of experiences, emotions, and identities, each piece contributing to the whole. When you own your story, you honor all of these pieces, even the ones that are hard to look at. You see yourself not as a collection of flaws or achievements, but as a whole, imperfect and beautiful human being. Who are you? Owning your story also means recognizing the power of choice. While you cannot change the past, you can choose how you respond to it. You can choose to let it define you, or you can choose to use it as a source of strength and wisdom. You can choose to carry the lessons forward while letting go of the pain. This is not an easy process, and it often requires support from others, whether through therapy, friendship, or community. But it is a choice that is always available to you, no matter what your story has been. One of the most transformative aspects of owning your story is the freedom it brings. When you stop hiding or apologizing for who you are, you free yourself from the burden of pretense. You no longer have to expend energy maintaining a facade or seeking approval. Instead, you can channel that energy into living authentically and pursuing what truly matters to you. This freedom is both empowering and exhilarating. You feel your truth, and when you feel it most strongly, when you get that energy, it allows you to step into your full potential and to create a life that is aligned with your values and dreams. Owning your story is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice. It requires you to show up for yourself, to make choices that align with your truth, and to keep moving forward, even when it's hard. It requires you to embrace the uncertainty of life and to trust that you are capable of handling whatever comes your way. And it requires you to be gentle with yourself, to recognize that growth takes time, and to celebrate the progress you make along the way. When you own your story, you become a source of inspiration for others. Your courage to live authentically encourages them to do the same. Your willingness to share your struggles reminds them that they are not alone. And your commitment to your truth serves as a powerful example of what it means to live with integrity. Owning your story is not just an act of self-love. It is a gift to the world. So no matter who's watching, own your story. Embrace it in its entirety with all its beauty and messiness. Stand in your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And remember that your story matters, not because it is perfect, but because it is yours. Owning your story takes courage, but it is a courage that transforms not just your life, but the lives of those around you. In owning your story, you step into the fullness of who you are, and that is a powerful, beautiful thing. To live free of others' judgment is not to exist in a world where judgment doesn't happen, because it always will. It is instead to live in such a way that judgment no longer holds the power to define you. It is to step beyond the reach of external opinions and into the embrace of your own truth. This freedom is a gift you give yourself, but it is not handed over easily. It requires self-awarenesses, intentionality, and an unshakable commitment to your own worth. Judgment is an inescapable part of life. People will always have opinions about who you are, what you do, and how you choose to live. Some judgments are spoken aloud, others are silent, unspoken assumptions that nonetheless make themselves felt. It's human nature to form opinions, to categorize, and to critique. We do it ourselves every day, often without even realizing it. But while judgment may be inevitable, being controlled by it is not. Do you imagine being controlled by it is not? The choice to live free of others' judgment is a decision to prioritize your own values, dreams, and self-worth above the opinions of others. Living free of judgment begins with a shift in perspective. It requires recognizing that other people's opinions are not reflections of your truth, but of their own inner worlds. People judge based on their experiences, beliefs, fears, and insecurities. When someone criticizes you, it says more about them than it does about you. This understanding can be profoundly liberating. It allows you to see judgment for what it is, a projection, not an absolute truth. With this perspective, you can begin to release the grip that judgment has on your life. But understanding this intellectually is not enough. To truly free yourself from judgment, you must confront the ways in which you've internalized it. We all carry the echoes of past criticisms, the words that made us doubt ourselves, the looks that made us feel small, the rejections that made us question our worth. These experiences leave imprints, shaping how we see ourselves and how we navigate the world. To live free of judgment, you must do the inner work of unlearning these imprints. This means examining the stories you tell yourself about who you are and where your worth comes from. It means identifying the voices of judgment that you've internalized and replacing them with your own voice of self-compassion and self-trust. One of the greatest barriers to living free of judgment is the desire for approval. As social beings, we crave connection and acceptance. We want to belong, to be seen, and to be valued. There is nothing wrong with this. It's a natural and deeply human need. But when the desire for approval becomes a driving force in our lives, it can lead us away from our truth. We start to make choices based on what we think others want, rather than what we truly desire. We dilute our authenticity to fit in, to avoid criticism, or to gain validation. This is a subtle but profound form of self-abandonment. To live free of judgment is to reclaim your authenticity. It is to prioritize your own approval above the approval of others. This does not mean rejecting connection or isolating yourself. On the contrary, it means cultivating connections that are rooted in authenticity rather than performance. It means surrounding yourself with people who value you for who you are, not for who they want you to be. And it means being willing to let go of relationships, situations, or environments that demand you to compromise your truth. Identify what is truth. Identify what is truth. Freedom from judgment also requires developing resilience. No matter how confident or self-assured you are, there will be moments when judgment stings. A harsh word, a disapproving look, or a dismissive comment can catch you off guard and trigger feelings of self-doubt or shame. Resilience is the ability to navigate these moments without being derailed by them. It's the capacity to feel the sting of judgment without letting it define you. Resilience is built through practice. It's built by reminding yourself of your worth, by seeking out supportive people, and by cultivating practices that strengthen your sense of self, whether that's journaling, meditation, therapy, or creative expression. Another crucial aspect of living free of judgment is learning to distinguish between constructive feedback and destructive criticism. Not all judgments are created equal. Some come from a place of care and are meant to help you grow. Others come from a place of insecurity and are meant to tear you down. Being free of judgment doesn't mean ignoring all feedback or closing yourself off to growth. It means developing the discernment to recognize which judgments are worth considering and which are not. Constructive feedback aligns with your values and supports your growth. It may be challenging to hear, but it comes from a place of care. Destructive criticism, on the other hand, is often rooted in the critic's own issues and has little to do with you. Learning to tell the difference is an act of self-protection and self-respect. And living free of judgment also means letting go of the need to judge others. When we judge, we reinforce the very dynamic we seek to escape. Judgment creates separation. It positions us as superior or inferior to others. But when we approach others with empathy and curiosity rather than judgment, we create connection. We remind ourselves that everyone is navigating their own challenges, fears, and insecurities. Judgment creates separation, and judgment creates whatever one is navigating their own challenges, fears, and insecurities. This doesn't mean condoning harmful behavior or abandoning your values. It means recognizing the humanity in others and choosing compassion over criticism. When you let go of the need to judge, you free yourself from the fear of being judged. You step into a space of mutual understanding and shared humanity. At its core, living free of judgment is about living in alignment with your truth. It's about knowing who you are, what you value, and what you stand for. It's about making choices that reflect your authenticity, even when those choices are unpopular or misunderstood. This is not always easy. It takes courage to stand in your truth when others disagree or disapprove. It takes strength to trust your own voice when external voices are loud and persistent. But the freedom that comes from living authentically is worth the effort. It's a freedom that cannot be taken away because it is rooted in your own inner truth. Living free of judgment does not mean living without accountability. It's important to take responsibility for your actions, to acknowledge when you've made mistakes, and to strive to do better. But accountability is not the same as judgment. Accountability is rooted in growth and integrity. Judgment is rooted in shame and fear. When you live free of judgment, you approach accountability with self-compassion and a commitment to learning, rather than with self-criticism or defensiveness. You recognize that mistakes are part of being human and that they do not define your worth. Freedom from judgment also requires setting boundaries. Not everyone will understand or support your journey, and that's okay. What matters is that you protect your energy and prioritize your well-being. This might mean distancing yourself from people who are consistently critical or unsupportive. It might mean saying no to situations that compromise your values. And it might mean advocating for yourself in the face of judgment or misunderstanding. Setting boundaries is not about shutting people out. It's about creating space for your authenticity to thrive. As you step into a life free of judgment, you may find that your relationships transform. Some connections will deepen as you show up more authentically and invite others to do the same. Others may fall away as you let go of relationships that are built on pretense or approval seeking. This is part of the process. Not everyone will understand or appreciate your journey, And that's okay. What matters is that you are living in alignment with your truth and surrounding yourself with people who support that truth. Herman Tilsting wrote this book, The Gift of Fear, in 1967. To live free of judgment is not to be invulnerable. It is to embrace your vulnerability as a source of strength. It is to show up as your whole self, knowing that some will judge and some will misunderstand, but choosing to do so anyway. It is to prioritize your own voice over the noise of external opinions. And it is to trust that you are enough, just as you are. This freedom is not a destination, but a practice. It is a daily commitment to choose authenticity over approval, courage over comfort, and self-worth over self-doubt. It is a journey of unlearning the messages that have told you you're not enough and replacing them with the truth that you are. And it is a journey worth taking because on the other side of judgment lies a life of authenticity, connection, and freedom. In conclusion, we stand at a crossroads every day. We can choose to let fear of judgment control us, or we can choose to rise above it. The courage to embrace who we truly are, despite what others might think, is where true freedom lies. Let them judge, because in doing so, we give ourselves permission to live authentically without the weight of others' expectations holding us back. We're not here to please everyone. We're here to honor our own journey and to walk it with strength and integrity. So stand tall, be unapologetically you, and let the judgment be the fuel that propels you to your fullest potential. Your voice matters, your story matters, and the world needs your truth, no matter how it's judged.